Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art in both the performing arts and the business worlds. Week by week, we follow Anthony Mangone, owner of Trattoria 632 in Purchase, New York, as he navigates the internal struggles and external circumstances that impact the development of his restaurant business. Now, last week was our very first videocast together, and Anthony gave us quite an introduction. We learned about the impact of the intense Mangone family work ethic. We found out about how Anthony was mentored by a powerful political family whose philosophies and approaches became the foundation of his entire career. How his political connections fueled his success as an attorney. His immersion in the corrupt deal-making culture of politics that ultimately led to his indictment. Buying a restaurant with partners in the business as a way to survive when everything started to fall apart, and buying out those very same partners over conflicts around vision and operations. Rebuilding Trattoria 632, applying those very same philosophies and approaches learned in politics and law, and hiring a team that bought into his ideas and philosophies, creating a family-oriented, customer-centric environment. And we started to get an idea about how Anthony dealt with so many tragedies and setbacks. So today, we're going to dive into the emotional fallout from the indictment, which reverberated into every part of his life. And we will hear the gut-wrenching story about what happened after he was sentenced. So, Anthony, I know this is a difficult time to revisit, of course, but can we look at the key events from the period of time going from December 2015 to September 2016 and see how those events impacted you psychologically in all of the different areas of your life?
Absolutely. Well, first, good morning. Looking back on those times now, in as much as you say it's difficult to revisit, in looking back now, it's somewhat cathartic. And the reason being is because knowing what situation I was in and where we are now is quite honestly a sense of accomplishment.
Yes, yes.
But as I explained during our last visit, I had been indicted in January of 2010. I had not been sentenced as a result of different courses that my case had taken. And eventually we received notice in September of 2015 that I would be sentenced in December of 2015. So the fear and concern of what the outcome was going to be actually began starting in September of 2015, knowing what we were leading up to in December. Exactly. Clearly the case had weighed heavily on my mind from the day of my indictment, but once you get to know that your day of reckoning is coming, it becomes that much more real. So you get a date saying, report to the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan on December 11th, I think was the time, of 2015. That's going to be the day that you'll be sentenced in connection with your case. Leading up to that point, you have a lot of different mixed emotions. You're hoping you'll be able to go out of it unscathed. And when I say unscathed, what I mean is walk out of there with a non-incarceratory sentence. Yes. You're hoping for maybe probation. But you do realize that the decision is completely up to the judge. And so, you know, you have 2 children, you know, you have a business that you're operating, you have a wife, you have family members that are equally on pins and needles, and that's something that gets lost, I think, at times, because you feel like you're the only person dealing with it, but in retrospect, looking back, my children were dealing with it, my wife was dealing with it, my elderly parents were dealing with it. You know, I had family members and friends who would ask, and you had to kind of give them the same answer each time as to what the possible outcomes would be.
Right.
So December 15th was in fact the day that I was sentenced and scheduled to be sentenced. And those days leading up to it were extraordinarily difficult, because you're gathering letters and from family and friends who can attest to the person that will be appearing before the judge for sentencing.
Right.
And in most instances, you want people who can speak anecdotally about you in terms of being able to speak to your good nature, your good character, good judgment. And it's difficult. It's difficult to go out and ask a friend and say, hey, look, you know, I'm going to be sentenced in a case, and I would like for you to write a letter. It seems easy enough, but it's an uncomfortable feeling. What I learned was that despite how uncomfortable it was, the amount of friends that I had developed from this business were unbelievable. And one letter particularly was used throughout my sentencing memorandum by my attorney, because the letter was so thoughtful and so in-depth regarding the relationship that this gentleman had built with me over the years. And he had used a lot of Jewish proverbs throughout the letter to explain the change that he had seen in me from the day that he had met me in December of 2011 through the time that I had been sentenced in December of 2015. And so that became almost a centerpiece of my sentencing memorandum to the judge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, before you actually realized that a lot of people were in your corner,
Yeah.
you still had to come to work every day knowing the employees knew and a lot of your customers knew that you were awaiting sentencing. What did that feel like? And you had to come in every day nonetheless.
Yeah. It's almost like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
That's the only way you'll be able to get through it. You try to make it out to be that you live 2 separate lives, and whatever I was dealing with personally was not who I was when I was here. And you know, we have one of our managers, Des. She would often say to the different people that work here, look, you know, we all have personal problems, but we have to leave them at the door when we come through here, because essentially we're on stage here. You know, every night we're performing, and you want people to see the best part of you, and you don't want to be sitting there wearing your problems on your sleeve. So.
But that said,
yes,
there are problems, and then there are problems.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine how difficult that is to do. And I remember you're telling me that you internally worked so hard to keep your head held high and you know, just kind of plow through it. So that must have been very, very difficult, I would think, to do. And so not only do you have all of this anxiety over what is happening, what's about to happen, a lot of people know, yes, you're getting support, but as you say, everything is starting to,
the walls are closing.
The walls are closing in. How then did that impact your health?
A lot of sleepless nights. In fact, I can remember the nights I actually slept versus the nights I didn't, that's how
Wow.
it ended up. And you start to get into bad habits, particularly in this business. There are a lot of demons that are available to you. You know, you have a full service bar downstairs, and at any given moment, you know, when you're feeling that anxiety come on, it may be pouring yourself an extra glass of wine in the middle of the day, someone coming by to see how you're doing and sitting down and having a drink with them. And so you start to see a tumbling of you know, the rock going downhill, and you just start to realize that you're not living the best possible lifestyle. And it becomes difficult, particularly when, you know, you have to go home at night and you're not sleeping, and it becomes like Groundhog Day. It's the same day over and over again.
Yeah.
And all you're thinking about is that finish line and what the outcome is going to be.
Now, your kids happened to discover the indictment in a crazy kind of way. You told me they were Googling their names.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, of course, oh my gosh, and they find out. So how did you explain everything to them? How did you help them deal with their feelings? And how did it affect your relationship with them?
So my my son Anthony, my oldest, he shares the same name as me. He was out to dinner with his cousins, and they were Googling their respective names, and lo and behold, he put his name into the Google search engine, and up came my case. And the headline that had come up was that at the time I was 38, that it said Westchester lawyer faces 45 years in prison, and it was a picture of me.
Wow.
And it scared him. He immediately went over to my wife to show her. She called me right away. I came home. She actually called a therapist that we were working with at the time, a family therapist, and we had an emergency session the next day, just to kind of walk through the realities of the circumstances. And interestingly enough, my son, who at that particular time was probably 11 or 12, said, I'd rather you guys just be honest with me and tell me what's going on. Don't hide these things from me. Because what we had said to him was, you know, we didn't want you to really know what was going on because we were concerned how you would be affected by it. And his answer was, I'd rather know.
Right.
Than you guys
Right.
walk around and make like everything's okay. And, you know, my immediate response was, no, you're a child. You really shouldn't have to be carrying the burden of knowing that your parents are dealing with this tornado.
Yes.
But unfortunately, he did find it. And as a result, would ask questions regarding the outcome and what caused this all to happen. And it's difficult to explain to someone exactly what happened, except to acknowledge the faults and poor judgment that I had exhibited.
And what about your daughter, who was younger?
She was a little bit easier to deal with. She was not as inquisitive. Later on, she, I believe, probably suffered more and kept it internal once my case had been resolved. But at that particular time, she was younger and probably didn't have a real firm grasp of the understanding of the potential consequences.
Interesting. So, of course, you know, my next question is going to be how all of this impacted your relationship with your wife, Donna.
Yeah, I mean, look, the facts are what they are. I had put someone who had been with me since I was 18 years old through an extraordinary amount of loss.
Yes.
Having had the faith in me that I would be a strong husband, a morally correct husband, someone who did not engage in this type of activity, was something that she signed up for. And this obviously brought her an enormous amount of loss, changed our lifestyles forever, embarrassment. And so I clearly had failed on that role as well. And it obviously caused stress in our relationship. And I probably didn't do a good enough job of, again, acknowledging the loss that she had suffered. I was kind of more looking at internally like, woe is me. But, here she's, stuck with, insulating our children from this horrendous experience that was highly, highly visible in the newspapers, and, dealing with that, whether or not a school-aged child is going to come up and raise the issue to them. So she was handling that part, which I wasn't, and I was, probably more concerned with my own feelings internally. So there was definitely a conflict between the two situations.
Well, I can understand that because, you're both in the middle of a severe crisis.
Correct.
You undoubtedly are craving comfort and support, and at the same time, I imagine Donna's life is falling apart, as you're saying. And I'm guessing you both were emotionally overwhelmed, which
Correct.
I think makes it very hard to be empathic and supportive of one another. It's like the very thing both of you need is the hardest thing to be able to give under those circumstances.
Yeah, and it's difficult to communicate exactly what you're dealing with internally on both sides of the table.
That's right.
You want to look at just my circumstances, you could write a book on it, right? And so you could sit there and say all the different things that I was, the loss, the amount of loss, the loss, the humiliation and all this. But if I had extracted myself from that for a moment, and I was sitting with two people that were suffering through this, I probably would have been more equitable towards her and said, well, look at her circumstances. Here's someone who has married you, didn't sign up for this, and has been thrust into this circumstance. So, you're suffering, but your situation is self-inflicted, as opposed to her and the children who are collateral damage as a result of your stupidity. And that's probably the advice I would have given to myself and her had I been sitting on the other side of the table rather than just looking at my own circumstances internally. So those are the things that you deal with when you're going through, again, a complete tornado. Yeah.
And yet, you are still together.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. Look, someone once said to me one time, life's about peaks and valleys, and you remember the peaks when you're in the valleys. So you got to get through it, and I guess you work your way to a point where you say, we got through that valley. There'll be other circumstances in life that will endure, but this was a pretty deep valley. It was, every time we thought we were coming out of it, we would hit another low. Yeah, and we hit a lot of them between 2010 through 2016. It just seemed as if there was never we never had any wind behind our sails. It was always as if we were going right up against a headwind. And fortunately, we kept to the basics in terms of what we know, got my moral compass back, and stuck to what we do well, which is making sure we're good parents, continue to work at our relationship, continue to work at our respective professions.
Right.
And fortunately, we're moving in the right direction, where this time we have some, good wind behind us, and I think everything is working out, famously now.
Oh, that's fantastic. But now I really hate to bring you back to June of 2016.
It's a part of history, so.
So here we go. A new sentencing date is set.
So Yes. So the first sentencing date was December of 2015. At that particular time, although we were hopeful for a non-incarceration sentence, the judge took a different approach and gave me a sentence of 18 months. After sentence was over and we read the transcripts, we had noted that she had made an error in her sentencing, and as a result, we appealed that order. We had to go out, retain new counsel, which is never an easy expense, particularly when you're already in the doldrums of life. Hired an extremely aggressive appeals lawyer, appealed it, got a new date, went to the Court of Appeals,
Right.
which is in New York, it's the Second Circuit. And we presented our arguments as why we believed she was incorrect. And in addition, we had asked for the judge to be reassigned, reassignment to a new judge. We had felt that some of the statements that the court had made at my initial sentencing were completely out of line. We felt that there might have been a bias, and that she might have acted inappropriately. Went up to the Second Circuit, 3-judge panel, and received a decision back saying that you are correct, you do deserve a new sentence, but although we are concerned about the comments that the court made, we believe the judge can be fair on resentencing. So at that particular point, it was an interesting decision, quite honestly, because the way they had written the decision, as you were reading their interpretation of our argument, they appeared to be in agreement with everything that we were saying.
Right.
And they said, but we believe we're going to send it back to her. We believe she could be fair at resentencing. And at that particular point, I realized that this was not going to end well, because there was no way that I was going to go back before this judge and she was going to suddenly have a change of heart and say, you're right, I made such a bad mistake last time, now I'm going to give you a probationary sentence. So in some ways, it was a relief, not a relief, but at least I knew what the outcome was going to be. It's much more difficult not knowing the outcome.
Right.
So then we were resentenced in either late July or I believe August of 2016.
Right.
And it was, again, those days leading up to that resentence, again, you have to go through these emotions again. You have to go and ask people again, can I get some letters of support? And, of course, people wanted to write the letters. They wanted to be helpful. It got the sentencing and the resentence, and the case itself had received just an enormous amount of local press coverage. And so every time there's an article in the newspaper, it's regurgitating the same facts. And you sit there and you almost become numb to it, where in the beginning you would sit there and read every article and say, well, that was factually incorrect and that's not right. At the end, you just stopped reading them. People would say, hey, I saw it. Did you? I didn't even know it was there anymore. At that point, you just don't even want to read about it anymore.
Right.
So we were resentenced again in August of 2016. Much different demeanor this time with respect to the judge, who was very, I would say probably, I would use the word docile. She just sat back, allowed the lawyers for the government and for my attorney to present their arguments. And she didn't want to say too much because I think the decision from the Second Circuit had essentially determined that her statements in my first sentencing, the word that they used were intemperate. And that's, pretty defining, to say the least.
Sure.
And I believe that as a result of that, she had a concern that if she had done anything that might have veered off course or said anything caustic, that we would likely go back to the Second Circuit, and that at that point the case would have been reassigned. And no judge wants to get overturned on appeal. You know, it's just a
Right.
So we went back in August of 2016. She heard from both sides. My attorney, I believe the approach that he was taking, although he's a phenomenally great attorney, was the wrong approach, because I think he was trying to prod her into acknowledging the mistakes that she made the first time, and it was clearly not working to my benefit. So I said, wow, this is interesting. So you're sitting there and you're like, she's going to actually give me more time.
Oh my God.
And it's funny because you have all these family and friends that are sitting in the gallery, and anything that he's doing is not engaging her. She's just not taking the bait. She's just sitting there and she's sitting back. And as I'm sitting there and I'm watching her demeanor, I'm saying, this is really not going to end well. And I have to figure out a way to diffuse this. Now, I had spoken at my first sentencing, and I had gotten up and explained to the judge where I was hopeful that I had changed my life and all. But I wasn't prepared to speak at the second one, just thinking it was going to be more of a formality, and that she was either going to look at it and either rubber stamp it or maybe find a change of heart, reduce it a little bit, never thinking that there was a potential that she might go up from her original sentence. But as this is going on, I'm sitting there and you can't show any emotion, and you can't sit there and pull your attorney down and say, hey, can you do me a favor and tone it down a bit? And she said, would you like to say anything? And I got up there and I said, yes, I would.
It's
and
as
I
if
apologize.
she gave you the opportunity in the opening, and as if she saw what was happening.
So interestingly enough, I said, I don't know how to diffuse this one, but let me just speak from the gut and see where this goes. And so essentially, I came to the podium, addressed the court, again, apologized that we were back before her. No one was looking to undermine her prior decision, explaining to her that I wanted to thank her, when she had sentenced me in December, she had pointed out certain faults that she saw within me that maybe I hadn't really taken a good look at. And then I wanted to thank her for pointing that out, and then explaining to her the conversation that I had had with my children that morning, which was not an easy conversation, because the children had already been through the first sentencing in December, where they heard I was sentenced to prison. Then I appeal it. They're hopeful that I can get away from this judge. They find out I'm not, so they pretty much have come to the realization that this is not going to end well. And the other concern was that the judge had the discretion that day, if she wanted to sit there and say, I'm not going to give you time to surrender. I'm going to have you go in today. And so my fear was that when I was going that morning, that was what she was going to do. And I wanted to explain to my children, hey, look, I may not come back from this morning, and you should just know that that's a possibility, and that you should know that whatever the outcome is, you go and you walk around with your head held high. Whatever I've done is no reflection on what you are and what you are becoming. You're becoming fine young adults. Everything's going to work out no matter how this decision is made today. Everything will work out. Now, you have to say those things. You don't really know if it's true or not, but you have to give somebody that at least hope, particularly young children. So I explained to the judge that is what I had done, and that irrespective of what she may have believed my actions were, and I understood whatever I had done was wrong, that everything else I had done since that day back in January of 2010 had been towards rebuilding the person who I was prior to that date, and I put on, as many different instances of changes that I had made. And when I finished, she said, if I didn't say it the first time, let me say it now. She says, you are your own best attorney. She said,
Wow.
what a loss to the bar, meaning the bar community.
Right.
And I felt that that particular moment had changed her direction, where she probably was likely to just rubber stamp the 18 months the first time, just because of the way the case had played out in the press, the fact that we had overturned her on appeal. And then when my lawyer got up there and was making his arguments, I said, she's actually going to give me more time. She came back around. She said, I've taken into consideration everything that was said, all of the submissions that were sent to me. I have read all the letters from all the different supporters. And my original sentence was 18 months. I do believe that you do deserve a period of incarceration. And she sentenced me to a year and a day in prison. So there had been a 6-month reduction. And she had also reduced the time of probation following my incarceration from 3 years to 1 year.
Oh.
So it was kind of a mixed bag of a win.
Yeah.
You reduced the amount of time that you're going to be away, but you're still going to be away.
Right.
And she had reduced the time that I was going to be under supervision following my incarceration.
Exactly. Now, in anticipation of going to prison,
Yes.
you created an amazing document
Yes.
for your staff. Can you tell us about this?
So, this operating this restaurant at this particular point, notwithstanding COVID, has almost become second nature for me. I could look at a day on the calendar and kind of get an idea of what type of flow of customers we're going to have that day, how busy it's going to be, knowing what events are in the area, because for the most part, it's very cyclical, this business.
Right.
There are certain events, particularly at the Performing Arts Center across the street, that happen annually. So I said, if I had to educate someone coming through the doors for the first time in this restaurant, and they were going to be working with us, how would I leave behind a memo to let them know what needed to be done? And I sat upstairs in my office on the floor, on the floor.
Wow, mapped it out?
With a calendar, and I went through every month and every week, and I said, I'm going to be away starting September 26th of 2016. This is what you need to know. And I went through each week, and I said, we have to start planning holiday parties beginning in October. We should be sending out emails to every office party that had a party the year before, reminding them that this is a good time to start booking the calendar. Make sure that we cover the vents in October, because it starts to get cold, and this is an old house, and if these vents are not properly closed, we get a lot of cold air and drafts. If someone's not thinking of those things, and they're not reading and they're not remembering, maybe a few more weeks go by and someone comes in the restaurant that evening and has an uncomfortable cold evening, and they say, I'm not going back there anymore. So that is the way I was thinking, and making sure that they understood which days were particularly busy, particularly in the month of December, how I wanted the menu to appear for both Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. In January, annually, there's always a Miss New York competition over at SUNY Purchase. It's a particularly busy weekend for us. Wanted to make sure that they were staffed properly, and really tried to go through all of the different things that I have knowledge of up here, but never had committed it to writing, so that again, me not being here for, which was going to be a year, they would be able to take a look at it and say, oh, Anthony said this coming week we're going to have this issue. He anticipates that there's the annual breast cancer awareness walk in October. We're always crazy that day. We need to make sure we have extra staff. It was all those different things that I was able to leave behind as sort of a playbook for them.
Sure.
That they knew would be there.
Well, it just hit me that you went through hell for 6 years in anticipation of entering into another kind of hell.
Yeah.
And, perhaps running your restaurant, while inherently stressful, really helped hold you and everything together. So, it kind of makes sense to me that you would prepare such a document to ensure that your restaurant would be well taken care of in your absence. And, I think you had essentially codified how to run a restaurant, which is incredible. And I actually think it's valuable in a number of ways. And I know you and I talked about this at one point, which I'll share with our viewers, which is that, one, of course, it enables the business to run efficiently and effectively when Anthony's not there. The employees learn the fundamental operations of the business. They see that every person is an integral part of the process, and I think that engenders loyalty and facilitates a cohesive, strong team operation. And you can use this tool when training new employees. And finally, I think it's an asset that you have along with the physical assets one day if and when you sell the business. And I just felt that it's an incredibly valuable tool.
It is, and we're blessed, as I said the last time, that we have a tremendous team here, and we like to make sure that the group that comes in wants to be a part of that atmosphere. It is critical for our business. It is the intangible that I believe allows us to be successful. I can't speak for everyone else's business, but we're not a chain restaurant. We are a family-owned and operated business. My mother is here until 7:30 at night baking cakes in a very, very hot kitchen. My father is here greeting guests. I'm here. My wife is here. My children, the customers here have seen my children grow from when they were young till they're now in college. We've created so many different wonderful relationships as a result of having this business that, and frankly, in as much as all of the history was particularly bad, when you look at all of the wonderful things that came out of it, we're quite blessed. So you have to look at it from that perspective. The bad stuff happened, we dealt with it, and look at all the great things that came out of it. The business itself is what it is, but the relationships that have developed are so important.
Sure.
Because I didn't have those before.
Right. And now, again, I feel bad bringing you back.
It's okay. It is what it is.
To the bad part,
Yes.
as you said. But you received your sentence and decided where you wanted to be incarcerated. Can you tell us about
Sure.
this?
So, interestingly enough, we go before the judge that day, and we get resentenced, and she said to me, "What day would you like to report?" And my attorney gets up and he says, "Can he get 90 days?" And she looks at me, and I said, "No, I'll go sooner. I want to get this over with." At this point, we now know what the outcome is going to be. I had just spent from December to August essentially hoping that maybe we wouldn't be coming to this situation, I need to now put this behind me. This needs to now be in the rearview mirror, and I just have to get this over with. So we chose September 26th, interestingly, my father's birthday, and I had asked to be designated to a prison in Miami, Florida. And she granted that request, and I then spent from August to September preparing the different documents that we needed to make sure the place would operate correctly, but ultimately surrendered with my mother and my wife in September of 2016.
Wow. I don't know how you put one foot in front of the other, Anthony, to tell you the truth, but I would love it if you would share with all of us what you went through those initial days and subsequent weeks. Thankfully, I guess not a lot of people know
Yes.
what this is like, and you had some sense, because as an attorney you had visited clients in prison.
That's correct.
So you kind of had the contrasting view, if you will. But if you could also tell us why you chose Miami.
Certainly.
And I don't think you mentioned, but you had told me you were going to prison camp, which I thought was the craziest oxymoron I had ever heard in my life. So if you can also explain what that is.
Certainly. Well, first we'll start with the Saturday. I reported on a Monday to the prison camp. The Saturday before, there were an enormous amount of people here to come and say goodbye to me. I flew down on Sunday with Donna and my mother. We went to dinner. Just think of what I put my mother through. Is just this poor lady. I didn't, forgetting him and my father. They put these people through so much. They had suffered the loss of a child, and now they got to deal with this nonsense, right? Because really, that's what it comes down to. My poor judgment is putting them in a stressful position, and my mother is, flying down to Florida to surrender her son to prison. Certainly have to make sure that going forward, Mother's Day is always well recognized.
Wow.
But we had gone to dinner the night before, woke up the next morning, and we had about an hour ride to the facility. And you try to keep the air, you try to keep everybody light on their feet. You're forgetting what you're suffering from. You got a mother there that obviously you don't want her to, she's already scared. You don't want to be sitting there like a deer in headlights. So you're trying your best to be light about the situation, but you're dying inside because you can't prepare for, I have no knowledge as to what reception I'm going to receive on the other side of the fence, so to speak.
Right.
So we had pulled into the facility, and in retrospect, if you saw it from the roadway, you saw it and you said, well, that doesn't look too harrowing. It had Spanish roof. It was white. I saw a baseball field in the background, and we pulled in, and there were palm trees, and I said, well, this doesn't look that bad. This is great. It looked like there were offices in the front. So I said, I guess this is where I go. This appears to be where the camp is. And so there was a guard outside, and I said, I'm here to surrender. They said, okay, you don't surrender here, though. You surrender at the FCI, which stands for Federal Correctional Institution. So there was Miami FCI, Federal Correctional Institution, and the Miami Satellite Prison Camp, which was attached to it. But what they call the R&D is where you go and you surrender to, and you do all of your intake paperwork. So this is interesting because my mom and I talk about this at times. So here we are, we're going, we go, okay. And she says, yeah, it's just over there. And you see this, now you see the building that we all see in the movies, which is this, massive concrete looking facility, no Spanish roof certainly. And you see fences with just tons and tons of barbed wire, and you actually walk through a like a vestibule, and all you see is barbed wire. And so as we're walking in there, I go, wow, this looks interesting. And I remember my mother laughing, and we walk into the facility, and I said, I'm here to surrender. And I'm thinking, okay, it's probably going to take a few hours. I see some seats in the waiting area, and I think, okay, well, we'll probably sit there, and they'll call for me at some point in time. And they go, okay, come on in. Like, there was no waiting at all. So, and I remember leaving, and my wife and I joke about this now, but she was upset because when I left, I kind of just gave her a peck on the cheek, and my mother a peck on the cheek, because I had just been, the air had just been taken out of me. Like, that's it, you're going. Like, and I thought there would have been at least a little bit of a waiting period that, fill out a piece of paper. No, you go right in.
Oh, geez.
And so they actually take you into the federal correctional institution, which is what they call a low in the Bureau of Prisons, but it's for certainly more high-level offenders. And I recall the medical doctor taking my blood pressure, and she says, are you okay? Because my blood pressure...
Are you okay?
Yeah, no, well, because she says, your blood pressure is really high. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, it's going to be okay. And I said, no, I know it is. I said, it's just, it is what it is. And
oh, God.
And I remember they were bringing in a whole bunch of new inmates to the FCI, and I was the only inmate going to the camp. And the way the Bureau of Prison rules work is you can't mix levels of offenders. So I am eligible to be in a camp. This is a low inmate. We can't be in the same holding jail, in the same holding pen, because God forbid something were to happen to me, I would be able to bring a lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons that they had a higher security level offender with a lower security level offender. This person was injured or something happened to them. I would be able to bring a claim against them. So they put me in a separate holding jail, and there was a whole bunch of other guys in the other ones, and these guys were giving it to me. They saw clear that was the first time I had gone through the system, and they saw it, and they were riding me pretty hard. And I remember looking down, and I said, just got to take it. This is what it's going to be. So eventually, I left that facility, walked over to the camp, and it's just, this is life now. This is reality, and they tell you you're going to be in this particular unit, and they tell you where your bed position is going to be, and you have nothing. You have whatever's given to you. You have a jumpsuit and these really, really cheap sneakers, which are essentially slip-ons, and you have nothing. And just my luck, when I had gotten to the camp, normally we'll get into this, you get a commissary account where you can go to a store and buy your essential needs. But when I had been there, semi-annually, the commissary shuts down to do an inventory review.
No.
And so that week that I had been there, normally where I'd been able to go to commissary to buy my essentials, your toothpaste, your toothbrush, your real sneakers and clothes and things of that nature, they were shut down for 2 weeks for inventory.
My God. You can't make this
No,
up.
you can't. So now you're there, and you're in a facility with like-kind offenders, and what I mean by that, it tends to be more low-level drug dealing offenses and white-collar offenses, and for the most part, there's a camaraderie amongst the people that are there, and they know that you just got there, and they remember when they had just been there. So immediately I was welcomed with people who were like, hey, do you need soap? Do you need an extra pair of sneakers? And so it's a nice thing to see people look out for one another when they understand that we're all in the same boat. You know, none of us are with our families. All of us have lost our freedom and our liberty, and more importantly, the essentials that we need.
Right.
So it was somewhat gratifying to know that people were just genuinely nice.
But you didn't know that first 24 hours.
No.
That, but you.
No, you don't. You don't sleep. I remember, you know, I by the time I had come in, they were at dinner service, and I remember just that first day walking into the cafeteria, and you know, here you're eating every day in a restaurant where you can have access to any food that you want here, and they'll prepare it any way they want from me. And now I'm going into a facility where the food is probably subpar is being nice.
Yeah.
Subpar is being nice.
And
there's no special orders to sit there and say, can you hold that particular ingredient? It's just a mass production line, and you go up, they put it in your plate, and you move on. And it's an uncomfortable feeling. You're walking into a place, you know nobody. Where do you sit? You know, who's going to be, you know, courteous enough to say, come sit at this table? So just getting through that first week was just extraordinarily difficult. You know, you don't have your phone account set up yet, so you can't even call home. No one knows what's happened. Your family's waiting there with bated breath saying, is he okay? They have not heard from you. I think I was fortunate enough where the unit manager who was in charge of my ward allowed, because my phone account wasn't going to be set up as a result of this whole inventory issue, he allowed me to use his phone to just call home and say, hey, I just want to let you guys know I'm okay. But it had been, I think, about 4 or 5 days where no one had heard from me. And you can imagine how harrowing it is on their side, right? They don't know what to think. Well, is he okay? Did something happen? Why am I not hearing from him? And the Bureau of Prisons is not a difficult, is a very difficult organization to deal with in general. It's not that you can call up and say, hey, is Anthony okay? They don't give you any information at all. And so a lot of families, you know, unfortunately are left in the dark at many times as to the status of a loved one who is incarcerated.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I remember you had told me that, you know, in that beginning period of time, even if someone offers you something, immediately you're suspicious. What will they require of me in return?
Well,
what are they going to do to me? Do I say yes to this? Do I say no to this? And that guy who wanted you to help him drag his stuff across, how, calculating, do I say yes?
Yeah,
do I say no? What's going to happen to me?
There was so when I was coming in and there was a gentleman who was coming from, so the way the Bureau of Prisons security classification works is there's the penitentiary, which is for the highest offenders, murder, whatever you can imagine, whatever the highest level offense is, bank robbery, that all starts at the penitentiary level. Then there is what's known as a medium, which again, not a great place to be in. Mm-hmm. Then there's the low, which is the place where I had surrendered to, and then there's the camp. Offenders.
I still can't get over it.
Yeah, they call it a camp. I know it's
camp.
Nothing like summer camp, but an offender can go from max security of a penitentiary, and over time, if they follow the rules and take classes and get certificates of completion, over time, as they're doing their time, the Bureau of Prisons allows for their security classification to reduce. So that eventually a person who may be serving a 25-year sentence may start at a penitentiary and end up leaving from a camp.
Right.
Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to matriculate that person back into society, and each level of classification that they go down that's less and less, they get more and more freedoms. So it's their way of saying, okay, you've done really well, now you're going to get moved down to a low. Now you're going to get moved to a camp. And so this particular individual who I was going to the camp with had been all the way up at one point at a medium. He went to a low, and then he was going to the camp, and he had a legal file that was probably in bags that took up these 2 tables, in these big laundry bags. And he said to the guard, well, who's going to bring this stuff over to the camp? And he goes, you're going to bring it. And he looks at me and he goes, and I said, yeah, I'll help. I mean, what am I going to say? I can't say no, right? So I helped him bring these bags. Thinking back, they probably maybe only weighed 40 pounds, but it felt to me like it was 100 pounds.
Of course.
And particularly when you're walking and you don't know what you're walking into. And so, you sit there and you want to not have anybody take advantage of you, obviously. You don't know what to accept for people being gratuitous, or are they trying to run a scam on you?
Right.
Because in prison, there are so many different hustles of people trying to do what they need to do to survive. Not everybody is as fortunate as I was to only have a year and a day and have family members that were going to help me financially support sending me money to my commissary account. There were people there that literally needed to work for more than what the federal prison was paying them for their jobs. They would do anything. They would do your laundry. They would clean your room. They would do anything necessary so that you could figure out a way to get them some type of compensation so that they could survive while they were in there. So it's actually gut-wrenching to know that there's people that are there. They don't have family outside that are financially supporting them, and they need to figure out a way to survive in there. And so it's you really see the run of the gamut there. You see people that were high level financial fraudsters who live a very good lifestyle while they're there. And then you have people who are low-level drug offenders who, in my particular instance, came from Puerto Rico, because that was the only federal prison camp between Miami and Puerto Rico. And they don't have somebody back home that can put money on their account to go to the commissary to buy essentials. So they need to figure out ways to work for the people that are there to try and get them to figure out a way that they can get them some type of currency to survive.
It's very interesting. That's an interesting segue into the question I wanted to ask you with regard to how you were feeling as you became acclimated. Because I know that when we had spoken, one of the reasons you chose Miami was so that, in fact, you wouldn't have many people come and visit you.
Yes.
And I was wondering how that wound up working out for you, because I think you said you had only 7 visitors a year?
I think I only had 7 visitors. I chose Miami for a few reasons. One was I did have a lot of clients who had been in custody before, and one of the things that they had told me was if you're in a prison here in the Northeast, naturally you're always dealing with weather conditions, and I already knew the time was going to go by slow. The last thing I wanted to do was be stuck in a room for weeks at a time because it's below zero out, or it snowed, and you couldn't get there. So I felt that by going to Miami, I'd at least be able to know that I'd be outside most of the time. Anyone who I had spoken to had been in a similar circumstance had said, it's great when it's warm out because at least you're outside and the time goes by faster. And so I took that to heart, I took that into consideration, that was something that I would need to do to knowing myself. Otherwise, I was going to allow my mind to just run, and that's never a good thing. So I chose Miami for that reason. The other reason I chose Miami was because I didn't want any visitors. It was an embarrassing situation, and the last thing I wanted was my children getting in a car. A lot of these prisons in the Northeast are 3.5, 4 hours, 5 hours away, and feeling almost an obligation that they had to come and see me, knowing that they're both starting. My son was starting high school, my daughter was starting middle school. Do they really need to, on their Saturday, tell their friends, I can't, come to that party because I'm driving to central Pennsylvania to go visit my father in prison. I didn't want that. I felt that, look, this was my mistake. It was only a year, and that it was unnecessary for their lives to be disrupted any longer than I had already disrupted them. So I felt that, if it really was necessary for them to come and see me, they would make it the trip. But I think I saw them one time in the year, and even that one time, my daughter remembers coming in there into the visiting room and going through the security checkpoint, and me wearing a green uniform. That's not really the way I want them to ever have that vision of me. So I kind of thought that part ahead, and I almost regret even that one time that they did come, because I think it's a vision that probably will be imprinted for the rest of their lives. Have they gotten through that? Do we sit there now and have some fun with it? Yeah, but it's still something that they had to deal with. They had to deal with knowing their father was away, and they knew the newspaper articles that were out there. They knew the loss that I had suffered, the embarrassment that they felt knowing that their father was away and having to explain to their friends that this was going on. So I didn't really want to compound the problem by putting them in a position where people would say, this weekend we're driving to Pennsylvania, and they missed out on a party. Like, I didn't want that. I had already disrupted their lives enough.
And yet the flip side is that, as you told me, on visiting days, for example, that was like the longest day.
It was.
And when you did have visits, I mean, the good news, bad news is that when the visit was over, I think you said it's like the oxygen just.
You need 2 days to recover, and I remember it, and I remember when I was having my first visit, Donna had come to see me, and my bunkmate, who was a really good guy, he said to me, "Just so you know, you're going to walk in there, you're going to be a deer in headlights." He says, "I'm just telling you how this is going to happen." He says, "You're not going to be able to concentrate, and you're going to be so exhausted when this visit's over." And I was like, okay, like what's so exhausting about sitting in a room with somebody? And I just kind of just said, okay, maybe that's his experience. I don't see how that's going to be the case. Everything that he said that day was going to happen, happened. Because here you are, you're walking into a dormitory style room. All of the different families and friends are already seated waiting for you to come in, right? And your name is called over a loudspeaker saying, man, go and report to the visiting center because the visitor is already there and situated. So you walk in and he's right, it had been, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks since I had seen anybody from the outside, and you're walking into this crowded room, and it's loud, and people are emotional. They're seeing their respective family members, and you walk in, and all you can do is just look around the room. It's surreal. It's surreal.
Yeah.
And then when the visit's over, you're exhausted. It's, all the energy's taken out of you. You know that the person that was there is leaving, and they're going to go back to their everyday life, and you wish you were with them.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I didn't like the feeling. It was not a good feeling for me.
Understandable.
And so the weekends were when the visits were. It was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I recall, not only for myself, but just seeing friends of mine who, when their families left, I remember seeing a lot of them going back to their beds and just laying down because it's exhausting, whether they had just seen their child, or so you see that side of it, and it is draining. So it became a point where I didn't really push anybody to come and see me. The few people that did come, and I was okay with it because I knew when the visit was over how I was going to feel, and I didn't have enough time there where I couldn't get through it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was like everything's going to be okay. Let everybody just live their lives. I'm here. I can communicate with you by writing. I can communicate with you by email. I can communicate with you by phone if I need to speak to you. And that really was sufficient because ultimately I looked at the time that I was going to be there really to work on myself as well. And that I didn't need to sit there and take people out of their lives and sit there and visit with me.
But interestingly, to me at least, one, what should we call it? I hate to say advantage, but, or surprisingly, one thing that you did like and miss actually is your alone time.
Yes.
And that was astonishing to hear. But can you explain why that's the case?
So there's certain days, certainly I don't want to go back to prison, but you are removed from the world.
Right.
And people, I don't think, ever really get a chance in everyday life to be truly removed from the world, meaning there's no access to the world. Where our camp was situated, you would actually be able to see cars driving by. You'd be able to see the regular world happening. And I particularly remember Saturdays, which were a very long day because it's a slow day, because there's not as many, it's a visiting day, so it's not as crowded. There are vast fields that you can go and hang out on. And I would sit and just read. And I remember there were times that I'd be sitting there and you would sit there and you'd be reading outside under a tree, and you'd be sitting there saying, this is an experience. Like this is actually pretty cool, because I'll never be able to do this again when you get back into the real world. Certainly not in this business. There's no sitting around. You don't get that lazy Saturday to go sit in front of a tree somewhere and read for hours. And so there are times that happen where you just want that alone time to think and not have a distraction. And that is something that you get there. You get tons of that. You get tons of that time. You could do that all day long if you'd like.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And so finally, you, as when we were speaking, you thought, at least as you were coming to the end of your time there, that when you got back, you had a feeling you were going to sell the restaurant because I think you said that you felt it was going to hamper your growth, et cetera, and yet when you came back and came to the restaurant, you, to your surprise, were actually invigorated.
Yeah.
And
well, I don't think people, I know I suffer from it, particularly take advantage of their own personal time the way they should. They don't get enough of it. I know I certainly don't get enough of it. So when I was away and I would think back to the hustle and bustle of this business, and it is difficult.
Yes.
You know, you sit there and you start to put things in perspective and you say, it's such a time-consuming business, and there are other things that I want to do in my life. I don't want to be hamstrung in a restaurant business. And so I did contemplate saying when I got home, this was not the lifestyle I wanted to go back to, and be here full time, all the time, and
all the time, right.
and be here. So I did contemplate selling it. But I will tell you that while I was away, one of the things that I would do, and the people that work with me would laugh about, would be I would send home letters. And I had subscriptions to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, a bunch of magazines. People would send me books, but I would always look at these different food preparations and these different recipes, and I would cut out the articles. I would send them home and say, put this on for dinner on Saturday night, and they would sit there and they would laugh about it after the fact, because they would say, we would get these things from you. We're saying, you know, I can't get in your head as to what your perspective is of my experience. So anybody who worked for me, I don't know what their perception was, but in their mind, again, Anthony's in prison, and you know, how is he sitting there reading a newspaper and actually thinking, I want this on Saturday night dinner special? So they looked at it as like that I was crazy, but it wasn't that I was crazy. It was more a matter of, I saw this great opportunity. I think this would really go well for our customers, and I think they all got a kick out of it. When I came home, they would talk about it, and they were saying we just couldn't understand how you would sit there, or they would get an email from me saying, hey, listen, you know, I think this would be great if you guys really did this tonight. And so you have a lot more time on your hands to come up with creative ideas. But once I did get home, it was invigorating. I was at a halfway house in Brooklyn when I first got released, and they allowed me to come to work. And I remember coming back in and seeing everybody, and you know, now you're just full of energy. You know, you just had a year off. You shouldn't be tired. You should want to work, and I often say that to myself whenever I complain. I say, well, look, you had a year off. Not many people get the opportunity to have a year off from work.
Well, and with that, Anthony's restaurant story really begins.
Correct.
And first, Anthony, I want to thank you and acknowledge your incredible candor in sharing with us a deeply painful and difficult time in your life. And we also now really look forward to diving into the details of the operation of the restaurant and how things progressed over time. So we hope, ladies and gentlemen, you will join us for our next videocast, number 3, as we compare the skills needed to succeed in the political world with the skills needed to succeed in the restaurant world. And we will really flesh out the approaches and philosophies that Anthony brought to the business and subsequently developed that became the hallmarks of Trattoria 632.
Absolutely.
So don't miss it. Join us then, please, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.